Hi, this is Brent-Anthony Johnson for JamPlay.com, and in this lesson we're going to tackle the terminology and verbiage behind some of the music things that we encounter on a weekly basis, daily basis, some of us. We're just going to talk about intervals. Intervals are a very simple thing. Intervals are simply the distance between two notes. That's what we're talking about. So we're going to go to our old faithful friend, the C major scale, and we're going to talk about the intervals of the C major scale. So if you have a C major scale, the first note, of course, would be C. Then the second note of the scale would be D. And that would be called intervallically a major second. The reason it's a major second and not a minor second is because there's another note between the C and the D. And we'll get into some things later that will identify that note as a minor second. But from C to D in a major scale, we have a second. It's a major second. The third note of the scale would be E, and that's a major third. So you've got the distance between C and E is a major third. By the same token, not talking at all about the C major scale, the distance between C and E flat would be a minor third. So if you hear this sound, that's a major third. That's part of the major scale. So that's a major thing that you're hearing versus something minor that you're hearing, or minor in tonality. So far we have C to D, major second interval. C to E in the major scale, major third interval. The next note of the C major scale is F. So the distance between C and F would be a fourth. Now, in general terminology, we call this a perfect fourth because the distance between the root note and the fourth is the same whether the scale is major or natural minor. But for now, let's just say that from C to F is a perfect fourth. The next note of the C major scale is G. That would be the fifth note. And so that sound is the sound of a fifth. And you hear that quite a bit in music. The next note of the C major scale is an A. And that is a major sixth, as opposed to from C to A flat, not in the context of a C major scale. That's a minor sixth. So if you hear that tonality, if you hear that sound, it's a very minor sound. But we're talking about from C to A, which is the sixth note of this, from the note C to A. That is a major sixth sound. The seventh note of the C major scale would be B. That's a major seventh. Unlike B flat, which would be a minor seventh. But we're talking about the major scale here. So we have a major seventh. And then finally, an octave, where the scale starts again, in essence. So those are your intervals. So if you look at intervals and think about them melodically, we can do a lot of things with intervals in the context of a major chord. So what I'll show you next is going to G, which, just like there's a C major scale, there is a G major scale. So I have those intervals, and I'm going to use a slightly different fingering for this particular example. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay? So you have 1, 2, major third, 4, 5, perfect intervals, fourth and fifth, major sixth, major seventh, and an octave. And here's what you can do with it if you have a song that's in the key of G major, or C major, or whatever majors. If you know the major scale and you're playing against a major chord, regardless of the rhythm or anything of that nature, here's some ideas that you can use playing intervals. And there you have it. So be sure to have fun with intervals. Take your time, learn your major scales, and don't be afraid to not use the next note in order as much as know all 7 notes and play them sort of in turn and experiment with those as you hear them. And as you hear them, certainly against music that you're experimenting with and music that you're listening to. Certainly, you know, this is about fun and melody. This is about singing. This is about taking your time and hearing each note of a particular chord, each note that's involved in the music that you're making at this time, and certainly the music that you hear in your head. Now I'd like to take a look at using these intervals in the G major scale, as it were. I'd like to move them up an octave to here. I'd like to play some of the sounds that you're going to hear just by using the intervals of the major scale. So an example of that could be taking G rather, and the major 7th of the key, which is F sharp, and playing those together and listening to that. For that matter, you could take a 4th and do that. So I'm taking the 4th of a G major scale and the 7th of a G major scale. So I'm taking the notes C and the notes F sharp and playing those together. So if you play all 3 of those together, you have that sound. If you just play the C and the F sharp. Now, if you move on, of course, and you play information like the A and the F sharp, you get that tonality, you get that sound. And so if you add, let's say, the 6th of a G major scale, which is E, and you play the 2nd, the 6th, and the 7th of a G major scale, you get that sound. But that's not a double stop, that's really a chord. Double stops are 2 notes played at the same time, or 2 notes played in conjunction with one another for sort of a melodic or harmonic reference. So one of the ways that you can treat this when using a simple scale, major scale in this particular case, is I like to play each note against the root note. So we've got G. So I've got G and a 2nd. Now, that note's here, and my G is here. So that's a pretty far stretch. So hearing them together in harmony, see? So together, that 2nd and that root, not a terribly pleasing sound. However, the major 3rd is terribly pleasing. It's wonderful, wonderful to hear. It's a wonderful thing. And so then you've got the 4th, which is also quite pleasing. You've got a 5th. That's nice too. A 6th. That's nice too. The 7th. And of course we've got an octave, which the interval is an octave itself. The scale starts over again. So as an exercise, what I've done is I've played each one of these notes against the scale, the notes of the scale itself. So by the same token, I would take the 2nd note of the scale, in this case G major, which would be A, and I would play it and the major 3rd. Once again, kind of an interesting sound. So that's interesting. Now if I played the 4th, that's not bad. The 5th, the 6th, the major 7th. And those are really neat sounds. Those are great sounds. And it takes you away from the idea that everything has to begin with the root note. Everything has to begin with G. It kind of stretches you out of that concept a little bit. So as we take this further, we've got the major 3rd. And since we don't play the major 3rd with the major 3rd, we'll play it with the 4th degree of the scale. Then we'll play it with the root, which is a G major, and then we'll play the note that's just below it, which is A, and hear those two notes together. Those are wonderful things to listen for and listen to. Now, just as we heard the C with a fourth, or the G with a fourth, which is C, and hear that again. But what we didn't hear was the C with an A so much. There's your major third with the fourth. Now the fourth and fifth together, that's kind of tricky because once again, we're looking at that tonality. So I've just displaced this note and put it here on a higher string so we can hear those two notes together. Same thing with the sixth. And the same thing with the major seventh. And of course the octave. So what I've done, in essence, in my own practice time, is I've taken each one of these notes and played them against one another in order to hear the different sort of double stop ideas that you can play that give you really wonderful harmonies that you can hear. Things that sound really, really pretty. That's kind of hardcore. But then you've got that harmony. From the fifth degree of the scale, which is D, I'm using F sharp. Then I'm using the root, which is G. Then I'm using A. Then I'm using B. Then back to A. Back to G. Back to F sharp. Listening to that is something that you've heard a lot, and that's certainly comes into play with when you're hearing bass players like Chuck Rainey and great players who utilize double stops so incredibly well in the context of key. So if you have a note or a chord like a G major, let's just say, and you hear this on top of it, it starts to add more to your lines. It starts to add more to the harmonic content that you're contributing to the line. And it certainly does a lot too for the rest of the music. Remember, bass is not only a foundational instrument, but it just provides so much rich and wonderful harmony to your playing. So take a look at those things. Have fun with that. And I'll see you again on JamPlay.com. Looking forward to it.